Alyssa Johnson never imagined that one trip to see her beloved grandmother would upend her entire sense of security. Tired from a whirlwind week of wedding preparations, she just wanted a peaceful flight with her fiancé, Marcus Turner. But fate had other plans when a snide remark from a flight attendant ignited a chain reaction of insults, accusations, and painful reminders of the prejudice Alyssa still faced. Little did the airline crew know, an entire CNN camera team, led by Marcus himself, was about to board the plane, capturing every shocking twist. By the end of this flight, no one would emerge unscathed. At just past 5 a.m, Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport pulsed with its usual rhythm. Bright lights, long lines, and the familiar tension of early flights. Alyssa Johnson stood in line at the Delta check-in counter, shifting on her feet, exhaustion clinging to her after a whirlwind week of wedding planning. Her fiancé, Marcus Turner, rubbed her shoulders gently behind her. Their trip to Seattle wasn't planned. Just days ago, Alyssa's beloved grandmother had taken a sudden turn for the worse in her fight against heart disease. Without hesitation, Alyssa and Marcus booked the earliest flight they could. Her grandmother wasn't just family. She was Alyssa's anchor, the voice who had guided her through life with strength, pride, and unyielding love, especially in the face of prejudice. Marcus, a rising journalist recently recruited by CNN, whispered reassuringly, "We'll make it, Liz. We'll see her." Alyssa nodded, but the unease in her chest refused to ease. At the counter, the agent Mia scanned their tickets and ID with mechanical efficiency. "2 bags to Seattle," she asked. Alyssa confirmed, watching Mia tag their luggage and hand over their boarding passes. "Gate B12. Boarding in about an hour." With that hurdle cleared, they found seats near a coffee shop. The airport buzzed with movement and announcements. But Alyssa's thoughts were elsewhere, on her grandmother's voice, her stories of growing up black in the South, and the quiet wisdom she always shared over late-night tea. Marcus tried to lighten the mood. "There's a CNN crew flying to Seattle this morning. They're covering that pipeline protest I told you about. Might be on our flight." Alyssa managed a faint smile. "Crazy to think how far you've come. From local TV to CNN backup." He grinned. Hard work, talent, and a little luck. They sat together quietly for a few minutes before checking their gate again and deciding to head toward security. As they walked, Alyssa felt something tighten in her chest. Maybe it was travel nerves, or maybe it was the way a few uniformed flight attendants gave her quick glances as they passed. Nothing overt, but enough to raise her guard. She tried to dismiss it. This trip was about family, not strangers. But a subtle discomfort clung to her as they moved through the terminal, an unshakable feeling that something ahead wouldn't go as planned. What Alyssa didn't know then was that this flight would become far more than just a journey to see her grandmother. It would ignite a confrontation, draw national attention, and test every ounce of composure she possessed, with a CNN camera crew waiting just one gate away. TSA lines at Hartsfield-Jackson were notoriously long, even at the crack of dawn. Alyssa and Marcus joined a serpentine queue that stretched halfway down the corridor. Security personnel barked instructions, laptops and tablets out of bags. No liquids over 3.4 ounces. The typical routine that on any other day would be mildly tedious. Today it felt excruciating. Alyssa's stomach twisted in anxious knots. She just wanted to be at her grandmother's side. Behind them, an older couple bickered about whether they should have left home sooner, the man complaining that his wife always wanted to pack extra shoes. In front, a mother struggled to calm a crying toddler. Marcus tried to help pass the time by pointing out interesting characters in the crowd, making light-hearted observations. Alyssa forced a small laugh here and there, though her tension rarely dipped below a simmer. Finally, they approached the ID check. A stone-faced TSA officer glanced between Alyssa's driver's license and her face. His gaze lingered a few seconds too long, as if suspecting a discrepancy. Alyssa forced herself to keep calm, used to the extra scrutiny she sometimes attracted for no obvious reason. After an uncomfortably silent moment, he handed her ID back. Marcus stepped forward. The officer repeated the process, though more smoothly this time. Within moments, they were clear to move on to the scanners. Alyssa placed her carry-on in a grey plastic bin and removed her shoes. She shuffled through the body scanner. That's when she heard an abrupt beep. A second TSA agent at the monitor frowned. "Ma'am, step aside, please." Her stomach tightened. She glanced at Marcus, who was already collecting his items from the conveyor, a concerned expression on his face. "Step over here." The TSA agent, a stocky man with an authoritative glare, gestured for Alyssa to move to a separate area for a pat-down. "We've got something flagged in the scanner." Alyssa's heart pounded. She had nothing on her, no metal, no suspicious items. She was meticulous with airport security protocols. She complied, arms raised, letting the agent do his routine pat-down. The entire time she could see Marcus pacing a few feet away, ready to interject if something got out of hand. The agent's gloves glided across her arms, waist back, and legs. Then he ran the gloves through a machine to test for any traces of explosive material. The entire process felt invasive and humiliating, especially under the watchful eyes of passengers inching past. It wasn't the first time she'd been pulled aside at airport security under flimsy circumstances, and a familiar anger simmered in her. Eventually, the machine gave no alert. The agent gave a terse nod. "You're clear," he said, without a shred of apology. Alyssa let out a quiet exhale. She collected her belongings, relaced her shoes, and rejoined Marcus, who placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked quietly, concern evident in his voice. "Yeah," Alyssa said, forcing a calm tone. "Just want to get through this flight." They left the security area, funneling into the main concourse. The overhead screens flashed with flight numbers and departure times. At gate B12, they could see a steady stream of travelers waiting. Some were business folks in pressed suits, typing away on laptops. Others were families, sprawled across seats, kids squealing about their upcoming vacations. Marcus led her to a pair of empty chairs. He rubbed her back soothingly. "We've got about half an hour until boarding. Do you want anything?" "Water, maybe a muffin?" She nodded absently. Marcus jogged off to a kiosk. As she waited, her phone buzzed. Her mother's number lit the screen. She picked up immediately. "Hey, Mom." "How's Nana?" Her mother's voice, tinged with fatigue and worry, came through. "She's stable for now, but the doctors want to keep a close watch on her." "Are you at the airport?" "Yeah, we're just waiting at the gate. The flight is on schedule." Alyssa rubbed her forehead. "How is she mentally? Is she in a lot of pain?" "She's a fighter. She's not giving up. But it'd do wonders for her spirit to see you." Her mother paused. "I'm proud of you for coming, honey." Alyssa swallowed the growing lump in her throat. "I'll be there soon, Mom. Hang in there." She ended the call and let her hand fall to her lap. Emotions whirled inside worry for her grandmother, exhaustion from the early wake-up, frustration from yet another random security check. Before she could sink too deep into her thoughts, Marcus returned with a bottle of water and a wrapped muffin. "Blueberry." "Your favorite," he said, offering a small grin. He sat next to her, letting her rest her head on his shoulder again. The comfort of his presence kept her from spiraling into anxiety. Moments later, there was a crackle of static over the gate's intercom. A gate agent announced, "Attention passengers of Flight 2978 to Seattle. We'll begin pre-boarding in about 10 minutes. Please make sure you have your boarding passes ready. We're currently waiting for the crew to arrive." Alyssa breathed a small sigh of relief. So far, so good. She glanced around, noticing a new wave of passengers approaching the gate area. Among them was a small group of people hauling professional camera equipment. Her eyes widened. She poked Marcus. "Is that your CNN crew?" she whispered, nudging her chin in their direction. He followed her gaze. Sure enough, the group wore CNN lanyards and carried a couple of large camera cases. One of them was a woman with a sleek black bob scanning the area with a determined expression. Marcus waved at them and one of the men gave him a polite nod, though they seemed preoccupied. They settled near the gate's far corner, checking some text messages and going over their gear. As Alyssa watched the CNN crew, she felt a wave of reassurance. Even though she wasn't directly connected to them, it comforted her to know that Marcus had colleagues nearby. She had no inkling that their presence would soon become so crucial. All around them, the typical hum of pre-flight commotion unfolded. Babies fussed travelers, scrolled through their phones. Overhead bins were discussed by flight attendants preparing for boarding. There was a certain tension in the air, though that Alyssa couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the leftover stress from the security pat-down, or the anxiety about her grandmother's health. But she felt it crawling under her skin, an electricity that hinted at something brewing just beyond the horizon. Little did she know the flight attendants and crew assigned to Flight 2978 were about to collide with her in a way that would leave a permanent mark on every single person present, and it would all happen under the uncensored lens of a CNN camera team. 10 minutes later, the boarding announcement came. First passengers needing extra assistance were allowed through, followed by parents with small children. Then business class travelers were called. Alyssa and Marcus were seated in economy, which meant they'd wait a bit longer. But they stood up, gathering their carry-ons, ready to shuffle toward the gate. The line moved at a slow crawl. A harried gate agent, sweat beading on his forehead, scanned boarding passes. His polite yet impatient smile never quite reached his eyes. With each beep of the scanner, another passenger proceeded down the jetway toward the airplane door. Alyssa felt the wheels of her carry-on catch on something. She paused, readjusting. Just as she did, the CNN crew stepped up in the line right behind them, laughing about something one of them had said. The lead producer, a tall man with a confident stance, checked his phone and said to his crew, "We need to get some B-roll as soon as we land. The protest starts at noon local time. We'll have to head straight to the site." Marcus overheard and gave them a friendly nod. The producer recognized Marcus's face from their Zoom interviews. "Hey, you're the new guy, right, Marcus? Turner, if I recall." He reached out for a handshake. "Pleasure to meet you," Marcus said, shaking his hand. "This is my fiancé, Alyssa." Before further conversation could blossom, the line nudged forward again. Alyssa heard the beep of a scanner as the passenger in front of them moved ahead. Finally, it was their turn. She handed over her boarding pass and ID. The gate agent nodded, scanned it, and motioned for them to proceed. All seemed smooth until an unexpected voice barked from behind them. "Ma'am, excuse me. We need to see that again," came a stern directive. Alyssa turned to see an older flight attendant with neatly coiffed hair pinned into a tight bun. The name tag read, Trish. Her brow was furrowed, and she looked directly at Alyssa with a cool, almost suspicious gaze. Next to her stood a younger flight attendant, an eager expression on his face that suggested he was learning the ropes, or perhaps just leaning into authority. Alyssa's chest tightened. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice level though laced with tension. Trish gestured to the ticket. "I need to confirm your boarding pass and seat assignment." There was some confusion about seat upgrades. Alyssa frowned, confused. "I'm not upgraded. I'm just in economy. There shouldn't be any confusion." The gate agent looked flustered, glancing from Trish to Alyssa. Everything scanned fine. Ms. Johnson is in seat 24B, he said, rechecking his digital screen. Trish didn't back down. She pursed her lips and addressed the younger attendant. "Please check seat assignments again. We've had multiple issues with overbooking." She turned to Alyssa. "We don't want any misunderstandings once we're on board." Alyssa felt her stomach churn. The subtle insinuation stung a public scrutiny that singled her out for no apparent reason. She tried to remain calm. "I can assure you I have the correct seat. There was no upgrade. Everything was purchased yesterday." Marcus, sensing her rising frustration, spoke up. "Is there a problem with the seat itself?" "Because we have our flight confirmation right here." He pulled his phone out to display the digital receipt. Trish waved a dismissive hand, then offered a stiff smile. "I'm just doing my due diligence, sir. With so many changes at the last minute, it's easy for mistakes to happen." By now, the line of passengers behind them had stalled. The CNN crew exchanged glances, and a couple of them discreetly started recording with their phones just in case. The tension was palpable. A moment later, the younger attendant, scanning the seat chart on his tablet, stuttered, I see that seat 24B is correct. No double assignment." Trish gave a slight sniff. "All right, proceed," she said curtly. Then she moved aside, letting Alyssa and Marcus finally make their way down the jetway. Alyssa's heart pounded a swirl of disbelief and anger. Marcus whispered, "Babe, don't let this get to you. Let's just get on board and settle in." She nodded, though her feelings were far from settled. Reaching the plane door, they passed two more flight attendants who smiled and greeted them. The contrast was jarring. These younger attendants seemed far friendlier. They pointed Alyssa and Marcus toward the narrow aisle leading to row 24. The plane's interior was the typical Boeing 737 setup: overhead compartments, cramped rows. Already passengers jostled each other while trying to stow carry-ons. "Here we are," Marcus said, pointing to 24A and 24B. Alyssa slid into the window seat. Marcus took the middle seat. A young man in a hoodie was already in 24C, deeply absorbed in his phone, barely acknowledging them. Alyssa let out a slow breath, trying to quell the frustration from her brief interaction with Trish. She told herself it could have been a misunderstanding, perhaps an overworked flight attendant just trying to do her job. But a nagging voice inside her whispered that it had felt personal, a suspicion specifically aimed at her. She tried to push that voice away, focusing instead on the reason for this flight, her grandmother. The bustle of boarding continued for another 15 minutes. The overhead bins started filling up. The CNN crew took seats scattered a few rows behind them, still conversing in hushed tones. Finally, Trish appeared in the aisle, instructing people on how to stow their belongings. Alyssa avoided making eye contact, but as Trish passed, her gaze flicked over Alyssa for a brief moment, icy and appraising. Soon the plane door closed. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Wilson. Welcome aboard Delta Flight 22978 to Seattle. Our flight time today is approximately 5 hours." He gave the usual spiel about weather conditions and an estimated on-time arrival. Alyssa tried to relax as the plane began to taxi. Marcus leaned over to whisper, "I love you. We'll get through this flight and be with your grandma soon." Alyssa mustered a small smile. "I love you too." "Thank you, Marcus." The plane ascended, engines roaring, pressing passengers back into their seats. Once at cruising altitude, seatbelt signs dinged off. People began adjusting themselves, pulling out laptops or books. Some drifted off to sleep. Alyssa gazed out the window at the cloudscape, hoping to calm the turmoil inside her. Then came the beverage service. Trish and another attendant began making their way down the aisle with the drink cart. As they reached row 24, Alyssa braced herself. She asked politely for an orange juice. Marcus requested a ginger ale. The older attendant nodded, but said nothing. The corners of her mouth turned down. She moved to hand Alyssa her orange juice. Just as Alyssa wrapped her fingers around the plastic cup, turbulence rocked the plane. Juice sloshed over the rim, splashing onto Alyssa's sweater and dribbling onto her seat. She let out a small gasp, scrambling to grab a napkin. Marcus tried to help. Trish's eyes narrowed, her tone clipped. "Careful." Alyssa looked up, annoyance flaring, but decided to remain calm. "It's fine," she said, using napkins to blot her sweater. "No harm done." Trish sniffed. "You shouldn't grab the cup so hastily." Here she thrust more napkins at Alyssa. Any attempt at blame felt uncalled, for turbulence was hardly Alyssa's doing. But she swallowed her irritation. The last thing she wanted was a scene. However, her neutral response seemed to irritate Trish further, as if the flight attendant expected Alyssa to apologize profusely. After an awkward few seconds, Trish pushed the cart forward without another word. Marcus shook his head incredulously. "What's her deal?" he mouthed. Alyssa pressed her lips together, not wanting to escalate. She unbuckled her seatbelt briefly to adjust herself, mindful of the juice that had pooled on the seat. No big deal, she told herself. She'd change once they arrived in Seattle, and all of this would be behind them. She had no idea this was merely the tip of the iceberg. In less than an hour, the tension would boil over, setting in motion a sequence of events that would not only derail the peaceful atmosphere of the flight, but also unleash a storm of accusations, revelations, and unforeseen consequences, made all the more potent by the cameras that would soon roll. An hour into the flight, passengers were starting to settle into their routines. Some watched the seatback screens, others napped or read novels. A low hum filled the cabin, punctuated by occasional coughs or the rustling of snack wrappers. Alyssa finished wiping down her seat and sweater as best she could, though a faint stain remained. Marcus tried to distract her with playful banter about wedding plans, choosing flower arrangements, finalizing the guest list, tasting cake flavors. She appreciated his effort, but her mind wandered. Beneath the surface, frustration and unease still churned. She was desperate to reach her grandmother. Suddenly, from a few rows ahead, there was a commotion. An elderly gentleman stood up, leaning heavily on his seat. He pressed a call button and signaled for assistance. Trish hurried to him, posture rigid. "I'm feeling dizzy," the man muttered. "I might need a little help, maybe some water or oxygen." Trish's response was swift, instructing him to sit back. She handed him a small water bottle. Satisfied, she moved on. Moments later, the man tried to stand again, looking for the lavatory. He stumbled, knocking into the drink cart. The cart jerked sideways, slamming into Alyssa's row. The edge of the cart banged Alyssa's arm. "Ow!" she exclaimed, caught off guard. Trish rushed to steady the cart, but when she turned to Alyssa, the blame in her eyes was clear. "Ma'am, you need to watch your arm. This is a tight space." Alyssa's eyes flashed. "He bumped it into me. I wasn't even in the aisle." Trish didn't respond directly. She helped the elderly man stabilize himself, escorted him to the lavatory. As she passed Alyssa again, she muttered something under her breath, something that sounded suspiciously like, "always something." Marcus heard it too, and he exhaled sharply. He leaned over to Alyssa, whispering, "Okay, this is getting ridiculous. She's obviously got some sort of issue with you." Alyssa's cheeks burned. She tried to keep her voice low, not wanting to create a spectacle in front of other passengers. "I'm not imagining it right. She's borderline harassing me." At that moment, a younger flight attendant named Chloe approached, wearing a concerned expression. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, eyeing Alyssa's arm. Alyssa forced a polite smile. "I'm fine. Just got bumped by the cart." Chloe nodded sympathetically. "Sorry about that. Let me know if you need anything." She offered a genuine smile before heading off to assist another passenger. For a while, Alyssa managed to calm herself. She closed her eyes, tried to doze off. But an hour or so later, the pilot announced that they would begin preparing for meal service on this long-haul flight. The aisles buzzed again with movement. This time, as the flight attendants passed out trays of food, Trish and her younger colleague hovered near row 24. Alyssa was half asleep when she felt a nudge on her shoulder. She blinked awake to see Trish scowling. "Your tray is here," she said curtly, as though Alyssa had done something wrong. Alyssa rubbed her eyes and lifted her tray table. The plastic meal tray, some kind of chicken and rice dish, was unceremoniously plopped down in front of her. Marcus received his with a far gentler hand from the younger attendant. By now, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The final straw came when Alyssa lifted the foil off her meal and realized it wasn't the vegetarian option she'd requested online. She'd specifically ordered a special meal due to her dietary preference for more plant-based options, especially on flights where standard fare often left her feeling unwell. She cleared her throat. "Excuse me." She called to Trish, who was just a few seats ahead. "I requested a vegetarian meal. This is chicken." Trish turned, exhaling in exasperation. "We don't have any record of that request. Next time, you should confirm with the gate agent." Her tone was dismissive, almost accusatory. "I did," Alyssa insisted, anger stirring in her chest. "I also selected it during the online check-in. Can you check if there's a spare vegetarian meal?" Trish's eyes narrowed. "We only have a limited supply of special meals, and if it wasn't in the system, there's nothing we can do." "I don't see why you're making a fuss about a free meal." Alyssa's face flushed. "I'm not making a fuss, but I can't eat meat. It's not about being picky. I ordered a specific meal." Trish sighed loudly, glancing around as if to gather support from nearby passengers. "You're being difficult," she snapped. "I can't just make a vegetarian meal appear out of thin air." "Take it or leave it." Marcus's voice cut in sharp with anger. "Don't talk to her like that. She's not being difficult. She's a paying customer who requested a meal. Please see if you can find a vegetarian option, or at least offer something else." A few heads turned, including the CNN crew seated behind them. One of the crew members began subtly recording the interaction with his phone. Trish's expression hardened, her voice echoing with condescension. "Sir, you need to calm down. We have 200 passengers on this flight, and we can't cater to every whim. If you don't like it, you can fill out a complaint form after we land." Alyssa felt the sting behind her eyes. This wasn't about the meal alone. The underlying hostility in Trish's words. "You're being difficult," carried a weight that went beyond simple inconvenience. She wrestled with a rush of emotions, recalling her grandmother's advice to remain poised in the face of prejudice. but the frustration was too intense. "There's no need to speak to us this way," Alyssa said, her voice trembling with controlled anger. "I'm asking for courtesy, not special treatment." Trish's gaze flicked over Alyssa's features. "Some passengers want to make everything about them," she muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Then she turned sharply on her heel and stormed off, leaving Alyssa with the unwanted chicken dish. It took every ounce of restraint for Alyssa not to stand up and shout. Marcus placed a calming hand on hers, though his own fury simmered beneath the surface. Several passengers nearby looked on sympathetically, while a few others seemed uncomfortable, not wanting to involve themselves. The overhead speaker pinged. Chloe's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Alyssa seethed in silence, her stomach twisting in knots. Marcus took a deep breath, leaning in close so only she could hear. "I'm going to talk to that younger attendant, Chloe. Maybe she can help. We'll figure this out." As the plane rocked gently, Alyssa swallowed hard. She felt trapped, humiliated. She knew something wasn't right here. The tension between her and Trish seemed personal, far surpassing a typical stressful flight scenario. Alyssa glanced around the cabin, as if searching for some measure of understanding or solidarity. She noted the CNN producer behind them giving a subtle nod of encouragement. He'd seen everything. So had his camera. A part of her felt relief maybe having it documented would prevent Trish from twisting the story later. But Alyssa had no clue how soon this conflict would intensify and explode, dragging in the entire cabin crew, forcing the captain's hand, and eventually making national headlines, driven by none other than the CNN team, quietly capturing every moment. The flight had only just begun to reveal its turbulent destiny. Marcus managed to flag down Chloe, who listened intently as he summarized the confrontation. Concern etched her face. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had a vegetarian meal request. Let me see what I can do," she said kindly. "We might have a couple of extra salads or something else that's meat-free. I'll check right now." Alyssa thanked her, quietly drained from the emotional toll. It wasn't simply about the meal. It was the humiliation, the subtle barbs, and the blatant disregard. She tried to blink back tears of frustration. Her grandmother's fragile health weighed heavily on her mind, and this was the last thing she needed. Chloe returned a few minutes later with a small tray that included a side salad, some fruit, and a roll. "It's not a full meal, but at least it doesn't contain meat," she said, apologetically, leaning in so Trish wouldn't overhear. "I'm really sorry. I'm not sure what happened with your special meal request." Alyssa forced a grateful smile. "Thank you. This is fine." As Chloe departed, the man in seat 24C, who had been largely silent, pulled out his earbuds. He glanced at Alyssa. "Hey, that was messed up," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of sympathy. "Flight attendants can have bad days, but she seemed to have it out for you." Alyssa managed a small nod. "I appreciate you saying that." He shrugged. "I've seen it before. Some of them think they can pick on whoever they want." Then he replaced his earbuds, returning to his phone. In the row behind them, the CNN producer and cameraman exchanged whispers. Marcus overheard a snippet. "We might need to keep rolling. This is already a story in the making." Marcus pretended not to notice, turning back to Alyssa. But he felt a mixture of relief and unease. Having the incident documented could help them if things escalated, but it also made him worry about turning a personal situation into a public spectacle. Time stretched on. The plane soared over states, drifting through pockets of turbulence. Alyssa tried to distract herself, flipping through an in-flight magazine, occasionally glancing at the silent screen showing the plane's route. Meanwhile, Marcus scrolled through his phone, drafting a short email to the airline's customer service to document what had happened so far. He knew that official records could matter if any disciplinary action was warranted. About 2 hours into the flight, Trish reappeared. She marched down the aisle, pausing occasionally to ask passengers if they needed a refill on water or coffee. When she reached row 24, she appeared to bypass Alyssa and Marcus entirely. The slight was unmistakable. She refilled seat 24C's coffee, then moved on without even acknowledging them. Alyssa felt her heart pound again. She tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the meal tray in front of her. Marcus leaned closer. "Let's just get through the next few hours," he murmured. "We can file a complaint once we land." But fate had other plans. From somewhere near the front of the plane, a male voice called out, "Hey, flight attendant. My kid just threw up." Almost instantly, there was a flurry of movement. The father called out again, "We need help here." "She's sick." Trish and Chloe rushed forward, and for a moment the entire cabin buzzed with concern. The plane's mild turbulence seemed to intensify, jostling overhead compartments. The seatbelt sign dinged on again. A wave of nausea flickered through the cabin, as sometimes happens when people hear or smell someone else vomiting. Alyssa could see the father frantically trying to clean up his daughter, who was pale and slumped in her seat. With the entire row of passengers standing or kneeling in the aisle, the path was blocked. Alyssa's sympathy went out to the child. She couldn't imagine being that sick on a plane. Minutes passed. The situation seemed under control thanks to Chloe's quick thinking. She brought extra bags, towels, and water. But then Alyssa heard a heated exchange from the front row. Trish's voice, raised, cut through the commotion. "Stop telling me how to do my job." Alyssa craned her neck to see a distraught woman, apparently the child's mother, trying to explain something to Trish. The mother's words were indistinct, but her face was flushed. Passengers began whispering. It seemed the mother was upset that Trish hadn't responded quickly enough or had possibly said something insensitive. Within moments, a second flight attendant hustled forward, this one wearing a supervisory badge. Possibly the lead flight attendant or purser. She tried to mediate, speaking in hushed tones to calm everyone. The child was soon offered a spare seat near the front, away from the odor and mess. The mother and father followed, still exchanging tense words with Trish. Alyssa felt a pang of validation, seeing that she wasn't alone in experiencing Trish's coldness. Clearly, the older attendant was not having a good day. Maybe she was simply burned out. But Alyssa knew from experience that sometimes these bad days masked deeper attitudes. She tried to suppress a surge of cynicism, hoping not to brand Trish as purely malicious without reason. 20 minutes later, the pilot's voice sounded overhead, announcing they'd be passing over a large storm system. The seatbelt sign remained on, and flight attendants were told to pause the beverage service. The plane rattled slightly, the windows revealing large swaths of storm clouds. Alyssa shifted uncomfortably. Then she noticed Trish again, standing at the front of the cabin, whispering with the lead flight attendant and glancing toward row 24. The expression on Trish's face was unreadable, a mixture of frustration and something else that Alyssa couldn't quite place. She swallowed hard, suspecting that Trish might be relaying her version of the earlier incidents. Sure enough, within minutes, the lead flight attendant made her way down the aisle toward Alyssa and Marcus. She knelt beside them, speaking softly. "Hello, I'm Emily, the head flight attendant on this flight. I wanted to see if everything is all right. There have been some concerns raised about conflict between you and a member of our crew." Alyssa's jaw tightened. Marcus spoke up, calm but firm. "Yes, Emily. We've had multiple issues. She's been rude, dismissive, and singled out Alyssa repeatedly. She even called her difficult. This isn't acceptable." Emily nodded, taking notes on a small pad. "I'm sorry you've had this experience. We strive to provide a comfortable flight for all passengers." She glanced at Alyssa. "Is there anything I can do to rectify the situation?" Alyssa considered her words carefully. She didn't want an empty apology, she wanted accountability. "I appreciate your concern, Emily, but this can't be undone. I'd like a record of what's happened, and I would prefer if Trish kept her distance for the remainder of the flight. If possible, maybe Chloe can assist us." Emily sighed, an apologetic crease in her brow. "I understand. Let me see what I can do. And I assure you we'll be making a full report." With that, Emily stood and headed back up the aisle. Alyssa felt a knot in her chest loosen slightly. Maybe this would be the end of it. Maybe the rest of the flight would pass quietly. She let out a shaky exhale. Marcus squeezed her hand. In the row behind them, the CNN producer gave a small nod of acknowledgement. One of his crew members discreetly offered a thumbs up. The cameras weren't rolling at that second, but the phones had recorded enough to piece together a potential story. Marcus caught the exchange from the corner of his eye, feeling a twist of conflicting emotions. Gratitude that there was objective evidence, but dread at the public exposure that could follow. Still, none of them knew the true scale of what was about to unfold. Because Trish had her own agenda now, a simmering anger that would soon lead her to do the unthinkable at 30,000 feet, setting off a chain reaction that would bring the entire plane into an uproar and change Alyssa's life forever. Another hour crept by. The turbulence smoothed out, leaving the plane sailing through calmer skies. Passengers attempted to settle once more, some returning to naps, others reading or watching movies. Alyssa focused on keeping her breathing steady, trying not to dwell on the tension that had overshadowed the flight so far. Marcus busied himself checking the flight map on the seat-back screen, noting they had about 2 hours left until landing. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered. A flurry of movement at the front of the plane caught everyone's attention. Trish was back in the aisle, confronting the lead flight attendant, Emily, in low but heated tones. Their words were mostly drowned out by the ambient noise, but the agitation was clear on Trish's face. Alyssa watched warily, heart-pounding. Trish stormed down the aisle, stopping abruptly at row 24. She glanced at Alyssa, then turned to address the surrounding passengers. Her face was taut, eyes blazing with what looked like indignation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, raising her voice, "we have a passenger who has repeatedly caused disruptions on this flight and has been verbally abusive to me, a member of this airline's staff." A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers looked around in confusion. Alyssa felt her heart seize. "Is she talking about me?" Trish continued, gesturing dramatically at Alyssa. "This woman has been complaining, refusing to follow instructions, and insulting crew members. As flight attendants, we have the right to refuse service to anyone who behaves in a threatening manner." A low murmur spread. Some passengers leaned forward, trying to see. Others furrowed their brows. The CNN crew abruptly grabbed their cameras. Marcus sprang to his feet, voice trembling with anger. "What are you talking about? We haven't threatened anyone. You've been the one insulting us." Trish shot him a contemptuous look. "This is exactly what I mean," she said, pointing at Marcus. "Both of you have been disruptive since boarding. You spilled juice, argued about a meal." Alyssa stood, her cheeks burning. You spilled the juice because of turbulence. I only asked for a vegetarian meal I requested online. How is that abusive chatter rippled through the cabin? Chloe appeared behind Trish, eyes wide. She tried to interject, but Trish wasn't done. I have the authority to remove any passenger from a flight if they pose a risk, she declared, voice trembling with emotion, or possibly with the high of confrontation. Marcus's fists clenched at his sides. Don't do this, he warned, trying to maintain composure. We have witnesses here who can attest to the truth. You're the one who's been harassing Alyssa. Trish set her jaw, addressing the entire cabin. If any of you have an issue with how I'm handling this, please understand that your safety is my priority. We do not tolerate unruly behavior. Alyssa could hardly breathe. This was surreal. Trish was publicly branding her as a dangerous passenger. A swirl of thoughts overwhelmed her fear that they'd be forced to land early anger at the blatant lies, and a sickening sense of déjà vu, recalling the stories her grandmother used to share about being falsely accused or singled out. She felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Suddenly, the CNN producer pushed himself out of his seat, camera rolling. I'm recording this, he announced. We have video from earlier in the flight. I can confirm that Ms. Johnson hasn't threatened anyone. This is a misuse of authority. The sense of solidarity from an objective third party gave Alyssa a jolt of courage. Trish's eyes flicked to the camera, a momentary flicker of panic crossing her features. She stammered, You can't record me without my permission. The producer continued filming. As a journalist, I'm documenting a potential act of discrimination. We've captured some of your comments on video. I suggest you stand down before you escalate this further. Gasps rippled through the cabin. A few passengers chimed in. They didn't do anything. I saw the flight attendant treat them poorly, one said. Another passenger echoed. Yeah, that's not right. Trish's face paled, then flushed. She spun around to face Emily, who had hurried over with the younger attendant, Chloe, in tow. Emily's hands were raised as though trying to calm a bomb about to detonate. Trish. What are you doing? She said urgently. We discussed this. There's no cause to remove them. Let's step to the galley and discuss. Trish cut her off, sounding unhinged. No, I'm tired of being disrespected and recorded like some spectacle. They're the ones who need to learn a lesson about courtesy. This is my plane, and if the pilot backs me, they can be forced off at the next possible moment. Emily looked appalled. Chloe looked on the verge of tears. Meanwhile, the CNN cameraman was capturing everything. Several passengers, including the man in seat 24C, voiced support for Alyssa. It was chaos, raised voices, the beep of cameras, the rustle of seatbelts as more people stood. Alyssa's legs felt weak. She wanted to collapse into her seat. Instead, she forced herself to speak, voice quivering. All I ever wanted was to get to Seattle to see my grandmother. I've been polite and patient. Why are you doing this? Before Trish could respond, the cabin speakers crackled. The pilot's calm voice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Wilson. We understand there's a disturbance in the cabin. We've turned on the seatbelt sign. Please remain seated. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin immediately. Trish's jaw clenched. She shot Alyssa and Marcus a glare. This isn't over, she hissed before storming toward the front of the plane. Emily, clearly mortified, turned to Alyssa and Marcus. Please sit down. I'm so sorry. I need to speak with the captain immediately. Just please stay calm. Marcus guided Alyssa back into her seat, his grip trembling. Alyssa felt her pulse hammering. This was beyond anything she'd imagined. Public humiliation was one thing, but the threat of being labeled a safety risk on a flight could have real consequences. Meanwhile, the CNN camera crew was abuzz, capturing passenger testimonies. "She's not doing anything wrong," said one woman, wearing a bright orange jacket, leaning into the camera. "The flight attendant is going crazy," another man chimed in. "I saw how that attendant kept picking on her from the start. She's lying about them causing trouble." Alyssa bowed her head, tears finally slipping free. Marcus pulled her close, whispering, "I've got you. We'll handle this." But his own face was etched with anger and fear. In the front, Trish disappeared into the cockpit corridor, presumably talking to the captain. Emily hovered near the bulkhead, scanning the cabin with a stricken look, clearly unsure how to defuse the situation. The plane continued to hum toward Seattle, but now the entire cabin crackled with tension. Passengers craned their necks, trying to glean what was happening. Overhead compartments rattled quietly, the plane encountering mild turbulence once more. Little did any of them realize Trish's next move would be even more shocking. Fueled by a potent mix of pride, fear of being exposed, and a lifetime of internal biases, she was about to commit a grave misstep that would not only ensure her own downfall, but also turn this flight into a national headline, front and center, on CNN's evening news. Alyssa's world was teetering on a precipice, and no one could predict the magnitude of what came next. Less than 15 minutes later, as passengers glanced anxiously up the aisle, Trish emerged from the cockpit area, her lips pressed tight. She marched down to row 24, ignoring the uneasy stares. With forced composure, she announced to Alyssa and Marcus, "Captain Wilson has decided to authorize your immediate removal from this flight upon the nearest diversion. We'll be making an unscheduled landing so that you can be escorted off safely." A collective gasp filled the cabin. Alyssa's heart lurched in her chest. What she cried. "This is insane. We haven't done anything wrong." The CNN producer jumped in, camera rolling. "This is wholly unwarranted. We have numerous witnesses who can confirm. Ms. Johnson did nothing but ask for the meal she requested. This flight attendant has been hostile from the start." Trish refused to look at the camera. She turned to Emily, her voice trembling with rage or fear. "They're endangering our safety by causing a disturbance. I have the pilot's support to remove them." Emily's face blanched. "Trish, please, you're making a mistake," she whispered, clearly aware the cameras were capturing every word. "I spoke with the captain. I told him we could resolve this without diverting." "Are you sure that's what he said?" Trish ignored her, focusing on Alyssa. "Gather your belongings. You'll be disembarking as soon as we land." Alyssa sank into her seat, numb with shock. Marcus stood, voice shaking with righteous anger. "This is a violation of our rights. We're not leaving unless law enforcement forcibly removes us. And when they do, they'll have a lawsuit on their hands." Passengers began clamoring, their voices blending in an uproar. "Let them stay. This is racism pure and simple. We saw everything. There's no threat here." Trish's eyes darted around her composure, unraveling under the collective judgment. She pointed a shaky finger at the CNN camera. "You're not allowed to film me without permission." The producer held his ground. "I'm documenting a newsworthy event. You've singled out this passenger, threatened them, and now you're diverting a flight over a false claim. That is certainly news." In the midst of this turmoil, Chloe stepped forward. Her voice trembled with raw emotion. "Trish, I can't stand by this. I've watched how you treated Alyssa. It's not right. You've been harsh and rude, Chloe." Trish snapped. "This is not your place." But Chloe pressed on, raising her voice. "It is my place. I'm a member of this crew, and I don't agree with this decision. You know it's not about safety. It's about your personal bias. I've seen you do this before, treating certain passengers differently." Stunned silence. The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Trish's face contorted with shock, perhaps realizing her co-worker had just publicly called her out. Passengers shifted, absorbing the gravity of Chloe's words. The CNN camera zoomed in on them, capturing every nuance. At that moment, the plane jolted, hitting a rough patch of turbulence. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Flight attendants, take your seats immediately. We're passing through a severe storm cell. Everyone remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Trish, Chloe, and Emily scrambled to buckle themselves in jump seats. The cabin lights flickered as the plane rattled and dipped. Overhead, bins rattled menacingly. A few passengers yelped. Alyssa gripped Marcus's hand so tightly, her knuckles whitened. For a terrifying 5 minutes, the plane pitched and shuddered, descending through pockets of turbulent air. Bags shifted overhead, oxygen masks threatened to jostle loose. It felt like the entire cabin was caught in nature's wrath. By the time the turbulence eased, an eerie hush replaced the chaos. The seatbelt sign remained lit, but the plane leveled off. Emily's voice came over the PA, sounding breathless. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was a rough one. Please remain seated until the captain says otherwise. We appreciate your patience." Despite the scare, tension over the conflict remained. Trish unbuckled from her jump seat as soon as the plane steadied, shooting a furious glare at Chloe. She hissed, "I will have you fired for insubordination." Chloe met her gaze unflinching. "Do what you need to do. I'm not letting you bully passengers on my watch." Passengers nearby murmured in support. Marcus leaned into Alyssa, whispering, "We have enough footage and witnesses to blow this open. We just need to stay calm until we land." But his voice quivered with adrenaline. Calm was a tall order. Just then, Captain Wilson's voice returned to the PA folks. "The weather ahead has forced us to reconsider our plan. We will not be diverting after all, as the diversion airport has similar storm conditions. We'll continue to Seattle as scheduled. Please remain seated. Estimated arrival is now about 1 hour behind schedule." Alyssa exhaled a shaky breath. Relief and anxiety mingled. They weren't being forcibly removed mid-flight, but who knew what awaited them upon arrival? It was possible that airport security or law enforcement would still meet them at the gate, spurred by Trish's accusations. Trish, meanwhile, looked furious and cornered. She had staked her claim Alyssa was a threat who needed removal. Yet the pilot, forced by weather conditions, had reversed the plan. With cameras rolling and passengers backing Alyssa, it seemed that every step Trish took only painted her in a darker light. Her gaze flicked from the CNN camera to Alyssa, then to Chloe, a storm of hate and panic swirling. But now, with the entire cabin united against her, Trish's power had withered. No matter how she tried to spin, this too many people had witnessed the truth. Hard karma, it appeared, was roaring right for her. Within minutes, the lead flight attendant, Emily, approached Alyssa and Marcus again. She spoke gently, her voice laden with apology. "I've informed the captain of everything that's happened. We'll be filing a detailed report. We've reassigned Trish away from your section for the remainder of the flight. I'm so sorry," Alyssa nodded. Tears pricking her eyes once more, this time out of a tangled mess of relief, vindication, and lingering fear. "Thank you," was all she managed. Marcus pulled Alyssa into a side embrace. Nearby passengers offered nods, thumbs up, or soft words of encouragement. Trish retreated to the galley, sullen and glowering, while Chloe helped Emily distribute water and calm the rattled nerves after the turbulence. The CNN crew captured glimpses of Trish's retreat, making sure her face and name tag were on record. Karma's wheels had been set in motion, unstoppable now. Alyssa and Marcus could barely comprehend how a simple flight to see a sick grandmother had turned into a battleground for racial bias, cruelty, and pride. But one thing was certain. By the time the plane touched down in Seattle, the story of Trish's behavior would not be contained to a single cabin. The entire nation would soon see the footage, and the consequences would unfold swiftly, like the thunderstorm they'd just flown through. The events aboard Flight 22978 remind us that in moments of injustice, standing up is the first step toward change. Alyssa Johnson's ordeal, caught on camera by a vigilant CNN crew, sparked a wave of support that transcended the confines of one plane cabin. Her story is a testament to the power of collective conscience when witnesses speak up, when co-workers call out wrongdoing, and when recording devices capture the truth. Prejudice can be exposed for the world to see. Ultimately, Alyssa made it to her grandmother's bedside, while the airline faced a reckoning for the flight attendant's misconduct. This story shows that accountability is within reach even at 30,000 feet. If you found this journey compelling, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let Alyssa's experience inspire all of us to challenge injustice wherever we see it, and to stay vigilant in pursuit of fairness and equality.